We've got somebody coming out here that's very astute with the history of Tupelo and Elvis, but before we get there, I just wanted to let you see this photo made here at Milam. See the guy in the upper right-hand corner over there with the overalls on? The only one, if you'll notice, in overalls. Right there. And while he was in school here, his teacher, and I'm sure Roy can tell us, but this is Miss Camp's class, and he went here, like we said, there's some discrepancy, 6th, 7th, and part of 8th, and on the day that he left, he was just this kid in class that was always playing his guitar and plucking on it, and he sang Old Shep just before he left. But while he was here in school, this is an assembly page from an event here. This is like a Thanksgiving assembly, and when he played the judge at the Thanksgiving dinner skit at the top, and then down at the bottom it's the thankful months, and Elvis Presley was October. So I don't know if you can read that, but you can go online and find this. But I just thought that was really important to really show the connections and look at that, and to know that all those other people were grandfathers and grandmothers and sons and daughters and had lives themselves that crossed up at some point with this kid that was in 7th and 8th grade here, Elvis Presley. So, bringing up now, we got Roy Turner, a brand new executive director at the Birthplace and a friend of mine for a long time. Roy, if you are back there, come on out. It is great to see you. How are things? I would think things are a little busy this weekend.
They are jumping, and we love it.
Yeah. You had the youth competition and workshop yesterday. What was that like out there?
Those kids were awesome. And to see their dedication at this young age already to Elvis and his music, it just shows the magic that he still touches all these years later.
Can you tell, because you've been a historian for Elvis and for Tupelo really for years. Elvis in school in Tupelo, can you take us through his evolution? It was mainly just two schools, Longhorn and Milam.
Right. Well, the first 5 years were at Longhorn. That's also where I went to school. I had some of the same teachers. And he came to visit his 5th grade teacher when I was in 3rd grade. And someone came to our room and said, Elvis is visiting Mrs. Grimes. Our teacher said, boys and girls, be quiet, I'll be right back. Well, you know how that went. As soon as she left, we were like, we just knew he was going to go to that auditorium where he first sang Old Shep in 5th grade and sing for us, but that sucker stood us up and we still had to do math. But I did have some of the same teachers. At Longhorn and in that community across from the Birthplace, Elvis was always cheered on and encouraged. It was a very warm, encouraging community. When he moved into Tupelo, he was slapped with a total different group of kids who didn't think he was so hot. Of course, it started to get pimply faced and a few things then, but it got to the point that when they would see him coming with his guitar, they'd say, here he comes, let's go do something. So when I was researching, I got the Tupelo High School Annual to look at the class he would have been a senior in had he stayed here and started interviewing people. One lady, Shirley Lumpkin, her father was Sam Lumpkin, who was lieutenant governor in about 48, 49. And I remembered reading an article where Elvis said, man, I remember when I left Tupelo, the last thing I saw was a sign that said, vote for Sam Lumpkin for lieutenant governor.
Wow.
But I asked Shirley, I said, what was Elvis like in school? And she said, well, I'm just going to tell you. If you wanted to make me mad, you would write Shirley loves Elvis on the board, and I'd come find you and we were going to fight. He was not the popular kid. We all know he marched to a different drum beat. And for all the naysayers, he never let go of his dream. And that's kind of what we talk about at the Birthplace. Yeah. It's for dreamers. A dreamer inspired it, and it continues to inspire dreamers today. And hey,
And that Birthplace, what is now, the Birthplace facility, that building that you're in was our, like a family life center, like a community center. And I got a photo here of you. I miss this guitar that used to hang there just to the left of the main entrance, the Elvis Presley Youth Center.
Yes. We hope to bring that sign back in some fashion somewhere as a photo op.
But that's you back in the day.
That's me. I was young once. But what I share with the fans, because so many of them don't realize this, I ask them, I say, do you even know why we've got this place? And some do, but the majority say no. And I say, well, I'm going to tell you. Elvis came back in '56 to do what he called his homecoming concert at Puffy Sleeve Velvet. And when it was over, he gave the check back to our mayor and said, I noticed the house I was born in and 15 acres are for sale. I want you to purchase it and build a park for those kids in East Tupelo. Now, this was a 21-year-old rock star, guys, thinking about the kids back home. I think that speaks volumes. It was the poor side of town, the wrong side of the tracks. And by the way, I was one of those kids. He comes back the following year, does another concert in the gold limousine suit, and I think it's the only time he ever wore the whole suit, I've been told. He gives that check to the mayor and says, I want you to build a youth center for those kids. So about that time, I whipped this picture out on my phone and shared it with the fans and say, I had my first dance in what is now our museum in 9th grade. So he started touching my life at a very early age, Tom.
Yeah, part of that life. It's so great that you're in that position now to relay those stories. And please, if you don't, follow the Birthplace on Facebook and social media. You've been doing such a wonderful job of sharing the day-to-day experiences. I'm like, boy, Roy's out walking around the lake this morning because you post these wonderful morning pictures from what's happening out there.
It's peaceful, and the people you bump into and get to visit with always have wonderful stories.
Yeah. There was a lady that came to you in the early 80s, and there's a photo here of you talking to her. Tell us about Elaine.
Elaine Dundee and Elvis changed my life. She came here in 1981 from London to write what at that time was really the first serious biography on Elvis. And she came with quite a resume. Her first novel, The Dud Avocado, was published in 1958. It's considered a modern classic, never been out of print. It's available from the New York Review of Books now, as are her other novels. But she had written a biography of Peter Finch, which had made the bestseller list on the London bestseller list. And her publishers wanted her to do one on the Beatles. And she said, nah, that doesn't interest me. But Elvis and his mother, that's the story. And to tell it, I've got to go to the source of the Nile, and that's Tupelo, Mississippi. Now, Elaine was born on Park Avenue in New York to a very wealthy family. Father and grandfather both millionaires, lost everything in the crash, only to become millionaires again. Her father gave the seed money to start the Albert Einstein Medical Center. After college, she moved to Paris to be an actress, found out she wasn't that good, went to London and immediately met this guy named Kenneth Tynan, who was theater critic for the London London Observer, and later for the New Yorker. They married, I think, about a month after they met. In all the years that they were together, they were the couple you wanted at your party, and you wanted to be invited to their party if you were in that theater circle. Their best friends were Vivian Lee and Lawrence Olivier, and I tell you this for a reason. Because when she came to Tupelo, number one, her friends said, don't go there, they're heathens. I hope I can say this. You will be raped 15 minutes after you get off the plane. She came anyway, landed on a Saturday. Sunday morning, she was sitting in church listening to Brother Frank Smith, Elvis's childhood preacher, preach. She stayed here 5 months, went back to London. Took her 4 years to write the book. I continued to find people, interview them, find photographs, documents. She'd call me once or twice a week. So at the end, she dedicated it to me and said, there's as much of your blood in this book as mine. We became lifelong friends. I helped her with 2 other books, but more importantly, in 2001, and I like to say it the way she said it, she said, I'm getting older. By the way, she was 60 and I was 29 when she came here. She said, I'm getting older, and when I die, I want to set up a foundation in Tupelo to expose the little Elvises to the arts. That's the way she put it. And I want you to oversee it. And she passed in 2008, and I was executor of her estate, and able to take, at the time, $600,000 and set up the Elaine Dundee and Roy Turner Endowment for the Arts through CREATE. It has now grown over $1.1 million. By the way, I don't get any of that money. And that's fine. But I do get money every year that supports numerous art programs and has exposed so many kids. If we would have programs in Tupelo that we have today when you and I were back there, ain't no telling what we would have done. But for instance, we bring an artist in resident in to work with the kids every year in high school. We've had spoken word poets, sculptors, songwriters, African dancers, and they stay for 3 weeks, and they reach these kids when the teachers can't reach them. All because Elvis was born here and a lady from London decided to write a book. I call that Elvis Magic and God.
Yeah. And you can still find that book around. I think I have it.
Oh, it's at the Birthplace.
Yeah, I had a feeling it might be there. There's other things that you've worked on too, and one of those things that we're looking at now is this, the homecoming. Tupelo welcomes Elvis home.
Oh, yeah.
The things that you've put together, I remember talking to you and Jim Palmer on a cruise one time,
yeah.
an Elvis cruise, about the footage was out there, but it was really a detective work and
yeah.
putting it all, just finding it and putting it all together.
Research has always been my thing. And when I'm talking to people and showing them some of the things in the museum, I'm afraid sometimes I come off as a braggart and I don't want to. So I tell them, I don't hunt, I don't fish. But when I found that picture of 10-year-old Elvis when he came in 5th place at the talent show, that's my 6-point buck. Jim and I volunteered with Pat Raspberry and CVB on the Tupelo Film Commission. And we were the only people that ever wanted to make films here were documentary filmmakers. And what subject? Elvis. Well, I found myself setting up interviews and location shots and blah, blah, blah. And I never will forget the first one. It was Arena Productions, and it was for BBC. And the young director, early in his career, was a guy named James Marsh. You may have heard of him because a few years ago he won an Oscar for Man on a Wire. And then he won an Oscar for director. And then he won one for, I always get it confused. I think it's the guy that broke the code, the gay guy that broke the code in World War II.
Yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch was the...
So I can say I knew him when.
Yeah.
It was called The Burger and the King. And we were supposed to, they wanted to showcase the kind of food Elvis grew up eating. So we were in people's homes. We were up on the hill in a gentleman's home who Elvis had ridden in the truck with as he delivered groceries to run them up to the door. And they were cooking good old Southern food, it was that type of thing. So they took us to one of the locations. I took them to the woods for a squirrel hunt. And I was dressed about like I am now, except a little Parker-like jacket on. And we get in the woods, and they said, we need another person in this scene. Here, take this gun. And my buddy Jim said, don't load it, he'll kill everybody. So I'm sitting there, really dressed in what really looks like hunting attire, talking about squirrel hunting, and I've never been squirrel hunting in my life. And when it was over, I said, you said this would never be shown in America, right? Yes, it'll never be shown in America. About 5 years later, I go to Rotary, and everybody said, hey, I saw you on Cinemax last night. So it just kept happening, and I always had this idea from interviews and things I would read about Elvis. In one of the outtakes from, I think it was Elvis, that's the way it is, he's telling his band members, when I was 10, my parents put me in a talent show. I wore glasses, sang a cappella, I came in 5th place, and I got a whooping when I got home from riding one of the rides I wasn't supposed to. And then he just bellows, like it's so funny. And I thought, this late in life, and this man is still telling this story, that was an important event to him. His 1956 concert that he called his homecoming concert. And another interview where they're saying, well, Elvis, they're breaking your records and saying, well, rock and roll music is the devil's music. How do you respond to that? And he said, man, I just want the folks back home to be proud of. So I wanted to juxtapose those two events that he felt was very important in his life. And that's kind of how that came to be. And then Luck had Linda Johnson and myself seated next to you at an Elvis birthday event that Graceland was doing. That's how I met you and invited you to come. Well, I came back and told Pat Raspberry, we need to get Tom Brown here to be a judge for the Elvis Festival. That's how we got him hooked into Tupelo.
Yeah, hooked me in, yeah.
And from there it went on. I think I sent you a copy and you tried to do something with it. And then a guy that I had met in helping Pat, Michael Rose, took it and was able to sell our idea to A&E's Biography channel. We had shot it in SD, they wanted it in HD, that was on the cusp of HD. And they were able to get Chris Christopherson to narrate it. And I got a co-producer credit. I'm also interviewed in it 15 years ago. I look so much better.
Didn't we all?
Oh, by the way, I didn't get any money for that either. I've done what I've done out of pure joy. This has been my hobby.
There's also been something that's happened over the last couple of years, and that was very quietly. Baz Luhrmann was preparing this film that opens in a couple of weeks, and he visited Tupelo. And I'm fascinated as I see him interviewed in different venues now getting ready for the release, even over in Cannes, talking about people like Sam Bell and talking about Tupelo. And we have a photo here. These are two very important people. Yes. In telling that Elvis and Tupelo story, and we've lost them both now. But boy, they were just such a part of that, and we're always so open to want to share those stories. And just talk about them for just a second.
Love to. I loved both of those guys. Guy had been sharing his stories before I really got involved. But a guy I worked with when I started researching Homecoming, Sunshine, he said, man, you ought to talk to Sam Bell. He grew up with Elvis. So I called Sam up, and his stories were phenomenal. And by the way, we have interviews in that documentary with Sam, Guy, and James Osborne, another childhood friend who we've also lost. But I was particularly fascinated with Sam's stories because this was the segregated South. And as you all know, Elvis's last residence was 1010 North Green Street, which has historically been an African-American neighborhood. And there were 3 houses, Sam said, that white people rented, but Elvis was the only white kid. And he ran and played with those guys, and Sam's stories were just fascinating. Sam's father had been killed in World War II, and his mother had moved north to find work, and he was raised by his grandparents. Keep in mind, this is segregation. He and Elvis would spend the night and eat at one another's house. Sam said his grandparents thought the world of Elvis because this little boy would say, yes, sir, and yes, ma'am, when white people just did not show that kind of respect to African Americans. They would go to the Lyric to see movies. Elvis would go in the front door. Elvis would enter through the side, marked code. And once they got upstairs to the balcony, Elvis would hop over and sit in that section with Sam. And Sam said, did nobody ever bother us? The other thing he shared was that Elvis was just drawn to music. I mean, who would have figured? He said they were playing in the street one day, and they could hear the sisters, I'm putting this in his vernacular, could hear the sisters rehearsing for the choir, and that church is still there on Green Street. Elvis ran over there, and the windows are up real high, and one of them had to get on their all fours so Elvis could stand on their back to peer in, and the ladies in the church saw him and motioned for him to come in, and Elvis did go in and sang with them. He said once a year they would have a tent revival, and you're going to see that in this movie according to the trailer. And Elvis went to it. Bo Clatton, another gentleman I was able to meet through Sam Bell, told me he actually carried Elvis down into Shake Rag, and he got to meet and hear Muddy Waters among many other great blues singers. Now, I found this interesting, Tom. As you know, I think you grew up in East Tupelo too, didn't you? During my childhood, and maybe yours, be it true or not, we felt like Tupelo always looked down their noses on us. I found it so interesting that in the African American community, you had the Hill and you had Shake Rag. And Sam said that people on the Hill looked down their noses on people in Shake Rag. And the people in Shake Rag were of a less economic and educational level than the people on the Hill, just like the people in East Tupelo were less in those two areas from people in Tupelo. I thought that very interesting. But the other thing Sam said is Elvis was always running around playing a broom. And he said he was in the service in Chicago at the time That's All Right Mama came out. And some of the guys from their little gang called Sam up and said, "Hey, listen to this." They held the phone up, and Sam says, "Is that our boy?" And they said, "It sure is." And Sam said, "We said he played that broom all the way to the top." I loved hearing those stories. I wish you could hear them from his mouth. He told them so beautifully. And you all, many of you probably got to visit with Guy, and his stories were fabulous.
Yeah. This lady here,
Aunt Lillian.
tell us who that is. Very interesting lady.
That is Gladys's sister Lillian. And I didn't know this till I started researching this book. I don't know who that is with her. But my dad actually worked with both she and Gladys at the garment plant. He just never bothered to tell me until we started researching this book. And Elaine was in Memphis that weekend, and I had discovered Elvis's third great-grandmother's grave over in Marion County, Alabama, Mourning Dove White, who was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian. And by the way, either third or fourth great-grandmother was full-blooded Jewish. So I called Elaine, excited I had found this grave. And she said, "Well, that's the best news I've heard, because I've had 2 interviews. One, I just had to literally pull every word out of the man's mouth. And the other was a no-show. And now I've got to call Aunt Lillian, and I just can't take another rejection today." And why I said it, I don't know, but I said, "You want me to call her?" And she said, "Oh, would you?" So then I hung up the phone and thought, what the heck have I done? So anyway, I call her up and I say, "Miss Lillian, my name's Roy Turner, and you don't know me from Adam's House Cat, but my dad used to work with you. Preston, prettiest black wavy hair on a man I ever did see. How in the world is he?" And she had to ask about everybody else in my family. So after that, I told her what we wanted. She said, "Y'all come on up." And we spent many days, afternoons, having the stoutest coffee I ever drank in her kitchen, and her sharing stories that we would have never been privy to because she was on the inside. Other things I had discovered in the genealogy, she was able to confirm. We became lifelong friends, and Elaine had such a heart. Miss Lillian was not living in the best places in Memphis at the time, and she would just periodically send her $500 and say, "Dear, I know you got medicines you need to buy." And then I had an aunt and uncle that lived in Memphis, actually my favorite aunt. We were always going to visit, and I'd always go by and visit her. And if for some reason we didn't have a lot of time, I'd get a call about midweek saying, "Well, I heard you was in Memphis. Why didn't you come by?" And I guess I got 2 big regrets. Well, I got a lot more, but I'll only tell you 2 of them. One, when Elvis died, I wanted to go get in line. And I mean, I wasn't even a big Elvis fan. I'm going to tell y'all, I wasn't. And Debbie finally got over it. This was trouble for us in our early marriage, but I loved Marilyn Monroe. And she was so jealous of this dead woman for so many years, but she finally came around. But I just felt compelled to go stand in line to see Elvis lie in state. And my boss said, and maybe he was kidding, but I was young and he was a lot older. He said, I can't say what he said. I'll rephrase it. "If you go, I'll fire your butt." Well, his threat worked and I didn't go. I'll always regret that. The other thing is when Aunt Lillian died, I had just been promoted to take that boss's place at work as plant manager. And her daughter called wanting me to be a pallbearer. And I knew I had bit off probably more than I could chew, and I didn't feel like I could take off, and I will regret that the longest day I live. She was a precious soul.
There's the family, I think, is what's so interesting around Elvis. We always hear about Gladys and Vernon, but there were other family members there. And so to find someone like that.
Lillian worked in the office there at Graceland answering fan mail. And she said at lunch she'd go in the kitchen, and if Elvis was in town, he might come down, and she could tell when he was troubled. She'd say, "Son, what's bothering you?" And he would spill his heart out. She said once Gladys died, she was never able to be that close to him again. She shared an interesting story, and I'm just going to tell it like Peter wrote it. She hated Vernon with a passion because of things she told us, some we didn't even bother to put in the book. You all know he was a womanizer, and he loved to drink, and he loved to gamble. But she said that he would buy vodka and bring it in and hide it from Elvis. Because Gladys died from cirrhosis of the liver. She was probably an alcoholic by the time she died. But Elvis would find the vodka and just raise Cain with Vernon. But the one story she told that just really fascinated me, he returned from Hollywood after filming one of his films, and Vernon had just married Dee Stanley. She had changed the drapes in the living room. And Aunt Lillian said he walked in and looked around and said, "Where's my mama's curtains?" He didn't call them drapes. And she said, "Well, I went to Goldsmith's and and he said, I'll be back. And when I do, my mama's curtains better be hanging on that window." And when he came back, he said, "Y'all get in the car." And he drove them around the corner to that house behind Graceland. He had bought it. He said, "You live here now. You don't mess with the boy's mama."
I got one more picture right there of you, and
Yeah.
she's a special person, and she really loves the people that care for the legend, and you guys do that.
Well, I had the opportunity to meet her, and that blew me away. I couldn't believe my name made the list. And I was expecting this haughty Hollywood movie star. She was the sweetest, most humble person. She was genuinely touched of what had been done. I'm not going to say what we had done at the Birthplace, because that happened before I really had a hand in it. What Henry Dodge and our board and the vision that they've had over the past years had done to that Birthplace, she said Elvis would be so pleased. She said he did not like accolades. When he was nominated for the Grammy, he said, "Why are they doing this? I'm just doing what I love." But she said he would really be touched with this. And another thing that really sold me on Priscilla, she said that she had come down with Elvis 5 times during their marriage, usually a Sunday afternoon about 2 o'clock. He'd wake up, come downstairs, and say, "Hey, let's go to Tupelo." And he wanted to ride around and see the house, the hardware, the swimming hole, so on and so forth. And in 1971 was the last time she had been here, and they had gone to the police department or sheriff's department, well, it might have been the sheriff's, and met. And Guy Harris was on the force, and Guy had pictures of them made that day. Now, she had not seen Guy since 1971. And he comes walking up, maybe from about as far as from where this front row is, and she sees him, and her eyes well up, and she says, "Guy, that got me." They walk off and have a private conversation. And of course, when it was over, I said, "Guy, what'd y'all say?" And he said, "I told her she need to bring them grandkids down here and let them see how their granddaddy growed up. But I doubt she will."
Well, we'll work on it. And I just want to say thank you, because you were on the board of the Birthplace Foundation, and you getting this job as executive director opened a seat up on the board.
Yeah.
And you brought my name up for vote. And Henry Dodge and the board approved that, and they took it to the mayor and the city council, and that got approved. So now I'm a part of the board of the Birthplace. Thanks to
I just want to say we have such a winning team at the Birthplace. First of all, there's Rhonda Lamb, who's been there 30 years. She is the heartbeat of that place. She knows it like the back of her hand. And if something happened to her, God forbid, I don't know what I'd do. All of our staff love their job, love Elvis. My wife says, my God, you get up every morning and jump at the bits to go to work. I used to not be that happy. And I said, Debbie, you don't understand. I'm going to work, number one, with people that want to be there, love what they're doing. And our customers, they're happy. Yeah, I'm jumping at the bits.
And
welcome aboard.
The part that I still love about it is it's still a personal experience, person to person, telling the story of Elvis. You don't have to put on recordings and things. It's people volunteering and telling the story of Elvis. So you do the king's work out there.
Our whole team does. One more thing, we had a young Chinese gentleman that spent the whole day out there a couple of weeks ago. And I finally stopped later in the day and said, I've noticed you've been here all day. And it just thrills me when I see somebody enjoying the thing all day. Are you a big Elvis fan? He said, well, I am. He stood and bowed, this young man. He said, well, I am, but I'm actually here on business. Anyhow, we had a long talk, and I visited with him. 3 or 4 days later, I got this 2-page email from him saying what a tremendous experience it was, and pointing out 2 of our employees, Shelby Jones in the house and Barbara Holland in the church, and how their personal story is so enriched his experience. That's what we're all about. And I had told him in the conversation, I said, you know, our goal here is that when people walk away, they go, wow. Because they come expecting to see a 2-room house. And there's so much more. We want them to go away saying, wow. He ended his letter with, I left, wow.
That's it. Roy Turner from the Birthplace. Thank you, Roy. My goodness. I love talking. He's got so many personal stories with